Hello, this is CE.Simgof. This is Chris. This is going to be just a crash course on some basic, what we call hard surface modeling in Blender, and it's going to be specific to basic item creation for GSPro Golf. There are tons more valuable tutorials on Blender out on YouTube for free and on paid sites like Udemy and other YouTube contributors like the Blender Bros and all kinds of stuff out there. But this will give you some really quick basics. Here's our Blender interface. Now, different than when we have a mesh file to open, if all you've ever done is mesh files through the OPCD tools, Blender opens blank, you get nothing. This is what's called the layout menu. These are all your different layouts up here, or interfaces, I should say. Mostly we're going to be using layout. When we go to texture things, the two we're probably going to use are either UV editing or shading, and there are other ways to do this. What those layouts give you is multiple views of your item and of your workspace. But the first thing we need to do when we're creating an item is to add an item. Shortcut for that is Shift-A. It gives you this menu, and it depends on what you're looking to make. Mostly you're going to be doing meshes. You can start with a plane, a cube, a circle, a cylinder. Those are going to be common things to start with, and you can change them into anything. For this, we're going to do a simple, like a rectangle, maybe like a wooden T-marker kind of thing. So I'm going to go cube. And now there's really no difference between this cube and the meshes that you see when you're doing golf course design. They're made of the same things. They're made up of faces, vertexes, and edges. If any of my menus look different, it's because of maybe some add-ons I've installed, but it's the same principle. To get into the meshes, it's the same as the meshes when you're doing course design stuff. The tab key, and then you can choose face, edge, or vertex. Again, this might look different due to add-ons, but if I go into face mode, of course, you got your six-sided cube. The first thing I do, if I know it's going to be something like a T-marker, and this is going to be sitting in the ground, I'm going to delete the bottom because we don't need it. And it just kind of simplifies things. Now, there's something you don't use a lot when you're doing mesh work for courses, and that is the different snap views. The number pad keys, it does not work with the numbers above your typing keys, but the number pad, they are shortcuts to different views. 1 and 3 are going to be either side. It's a little hard to tell the difference because it's a square. And if you do Shift 1 and 3, or I'm sorry, Control 1 and 3, it'll flip to the other side. So let's do this. We're going to grab something. All right. So you can see the selected face. Now that's the 3 key. That's giving us our left view. And if I use Control, I'll look at the other side of the object. So you can see it just flips it. Whereas the 1 is going to be front and back. So there's our front, Control 1, back. 7 key, straight above. Maybe you remember that one from when you're doing meshes. And then just use the middle mouse button, hold it down and rotate just to get your normal view back. All right, now let's do some alterations on this cube. Let's start modeling. This is what I'm going to call hard surface modeling. That's different than the soft meshes, which are general organic curves and things like that. These are going to be more straight lines and things like that, but the principles are all the same. So if you went to vertex mode and you grab a vertex, that's the G key, you can move that vertex around just like you would if it was a flat mesh, okay? Same with any other surface. If you grab a face and G key to grab, you can move it around any way you want, right? But there are a few tools that you might use in this that you wouldn't use in mesh. The most common two are going to be the extrude and the bevel. Extrude is going to create a new geometry. So if I select this face and I hit E, the shortcut is E for extrude, it's going to pull that face out, our new face, farther up. Now, the difference between that and move is that this is going to leave that loop, that cut, and it's going to create new geometry. Okay, that's different than if you were to move. If I undo that and I do a grab, remember, if you hit one of the keys that corresponds to the axes, so like the Z key in this case, that'll constrain our movement to just up and down. So this looks a lot like extrude, but it didn't create a new face. It just moved that face up. Now, the other option is once you've moved that up, you can do just like you do in the mesh course modeling, Control R to add loops. So I can add a loop, and that's going to put a loop that goes all the way around our rectangle. And again, mouse wheel is going to add more loops. And the advantage of doing that is then if you're in, you know, like you want to grab some vertexes or whatever and move them, then you can see how you can start creating different shapes of any kind you want. The other thing you can do is once you have faces, you can extrude those. So you can start just, you know, creating any shape that you can dream of with the combination of these tools, right? All right, so now we've got a weird shape going on, right? Edges, the other tool I mentioned is the bevel. So if you want to have something rounded over, let's go all the way back to our cube. Now, if we go to edge mode, again, Alt-click is going to, or double-click if you have that add-on, is going to select different loops and stuff. But just shift-clicking is going to grab different edges like that. Now, what bevel will do, Control-B is bevel. It works best in edge mode. Now, what that's going to do is essentially equal distant cut the corner off of something sharp or round it over. Now that doesn't really look round because it's a single bevel, like a cut across it. When you do the bevel, before you left click to set your bevel size, if you use the mouse wheel, just like when you use the mouse wheel for loops, you're going to add more iterations to that, and by using more, you're going to get the round over effect like that. Now, we're going to jump to something a little different here for rendering, but this matters. It carries over to Unity. So if you want this to be definitely a smooth edge, like if you really do want this to be smooth and not see any of those steps in there that you see with shading, right click, shade smooth is what's going to do that. What you're going to see when you do shade smooth though, is it's not just going to smooth your rounded over areas. It's going to try to smooth your sharp corners, and it's going to result in something that looks a little funky. You can see the shading's kind of strange when you do that. It looks good on these smooth areas, but not so much on these hard edges. There's two ways around that. If I go into the edges again, now if I select, I'm doing an Alt left click to select that whole loop edge, and Shift Alt to all the way around. If I added a tiny bit of bevel to that, that's going to give the shading a better idea on how to handle it. So if I go Control B and I just do tiniest little bevel. Now, if I go big, you can see I still have a lot. So I'm going to mouse wheel down to a single bevel, and I'm just going to make a tiny one like this. The smaller the bevel, the more it's going to look like a sharp corner. Okay, there you go. That's going to improve our shading a little bit. You can see it's going to round that over smoothly, but it's going to give us a little better shading on that. The other option for the bevel and for the smoothing is way over here in this side panel, the place that you're going to find things like, this is our materials. You're going to look for, not the modifiers, you're going to look for the properties, and that's data object properties is this little triangle with the 3 nodes. If you go to our normals, normals are what control the direction light hits things. So if we do auto smooth on that, you can see it's not going to try and smooth the hard edges, but it will smooth where you've beveled. And that's also accessed here, shade auto smooth right there. What you can change in here is the degree at which it smooths. So if I change this, you'll see this round over change. So if I take it all the way down, it's not going to smooth anything at this point that is more than 3 degrees. So this is more than 3 degrees. Obviously, this is 90-degree corner, so it's not going to smooth that. So if I take this up to the point where it smooths those roundovers, but I don't go to 90, like if you went to 90, it's going to try and do those corners and they're going to disappear and the shading looks weird. But if you take it down, it defaults to 30 and that's fine for this. Then when you're on auto smooth, it's going to smooth your roundovers and bevels, but not your sharp corners. So those are the two auto smooths that we can use. All right, I'm going to delete this. We're going to start over just to refresh. Shift A, add mesh cube. I'm going to go into face mode, delete the bottom. Now I'm going to go into a side view and I'm going to move the whole thing up so it's on the axis. This little dot is called your origin. That's where it plants from in Unity. I'm going to go to Tools over on this panel. I'm going to affect only origin. That means when I move something, when I G key, it's not going to move anything but the origin. I'm going to grab it, go to Z only, and I'm going to move it straight down to here. And then that, I'm going to turn off that. Now what I've done is I've created something where when this plants in Unity, that is the ground. So it's going to put this right flat and it's going to sit just like we expected here. I'm going to make this a little taller by moving up a face. I did not extrude it, I just moved it up. So now what we have is the most basic beam or log or wooden structure you could need. Now we're going to talk about how we get a texture on this thing. So the first step to adding a material to anything is to UV unwrap it. It's also called UV mapping. And what it means is finding a way to make your object essentially lay flat. In this case, imagine it like a shipping box, like your Amazon package, or a cube that you cut out and folded when you were a kid. Essentially, you need to pretend like you're cutting this at its seams till you can lay it flat. I am going to put two textures on this. Thinking of it as a board, a piece of wood, we're going to imagine that the long sides, all four of them, are what's called long grain, where you would see the wood grain running from top to bottom. And the top of this is going to be called end grain. If you were to look at a board you'd cut off, you'd see that it looks far different on the ends of the board, kind of like little rings in a tree kind of thing. So we're going to go to edge mode for this. The first thing we're going to do is, and this isn't always necessary, it depends on if you're using one or more materials, but we're just going to do it this way anyway. I have selected all four of these top edges with shift select. I'm going to right click and I'm going to use the M key, and what that does is mark seam. Okay. So these red lines that show up on your model when you're in edge mode, that is where you would imagine cutting it with a scissors. So you're cutting out the paper top of this. We also need to do one of these, because right now, if we look at the faces, I'm just going to hide everything but those. So I'm just hiding that right now. It's not gone. We have a tube. It's almost like think of it like a square straw, right? You can't lay it flat. It can't be laid down unless you were to take one of these edges and cut it, right? If you were to cut this lengthwise, then you would have something you could lay down flat. I'm going to unhide the top. So those are our seams. Now what you're going to do in face mode, select everything and go to UV unwrap. Now nothing that you see has happened. That's because we don't have a view of the UV editor, which is a totally separate window. If we click on our UV editing tab, and your layout might look a little different, I've made mine a little bigger, what you're going to see is a representation, and this has the same controls over here. So when you're in this window, you can do the same thing, go to face mode or click on this up here. Totally separate controls. Just depends on where your mouse is sitting. It will control that window. So these are our faces. We have our four long ones and then our separate top one. Okay, and they all look the correct proportions. They're all laying down. They all look the same size, the correct size, and all of that. But they don't have a material. We haven't assigned a material. So over in this window on the side, hopefully by now you know the material tab. We're going to do a new material. Okay. It's going to come in as just a regular white material.
we're going to assign material 1. Actually, let's rename it first. We're going to call it wood. We're just going to call it wood boards because that's what my texture is called, my image file. I'm going to do another one now. I'm going to do this one, new, and I'm going to do wood end grain because that's going to be our top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all 4 of these faces. I'm going to take wood board, and just so I can see the difference, I'm just going to give it a small amount of color. It doesn't matter what you do right now. We haven't set it up. And I'm going to assign it. Then I'm going to click on the top one, and I'm going to click on end grain and assign that. Now if I go over here to the viewport shading to material, you'll see I've got my gray white top, that's my end grain, and my wood board sides. And if I click on a face, you'll see in the editor where it is. Now we need to assign our image to that. So we're going to go to image editing. Here's a cool trick. What you can do, you can click on the shading tab. That's going to bring up a file browser, your UV editor, and your shader. If that's too confusing and you don't want to see all that, what you can do is under any of these windows, create your own. So if I went back to UV editing, if you put your cursor way up in any of these corners of these windows, on any of these windows, you see it turn into a little crosshair. If you click when it's a crosshair, hold down and drag, it's going to add a window. And you can change that window into anything. So I'm going to leave this as my UV editor. And over here on this little drop down up here, editor type, I'm going to go to shader editor. Okay, so that's going to give me where I set up my material. All right. So for the very basics of material setup, all we're going to do is we're going to change our base color to an image, okay? So just like when we're adding meshes, we're going to go Shift A, and we're going to do an image texture is what we want to do over here, all right? So underneath the texture tab, we're going to go image texture. We're going to go here and we're going to open, and we're going to go find wherever on your computer you put your image, all right? So I'm going to go, for me, it's 3D design, textures, and I'm going to go in and find my wood and boards. I'm going to change this to visual. All right. So what I've got is a few different wood textures I could use here. Depending on where you found these things or what you made for textures, you can use anything. I am going to use what's called here. I'm going to go wood plank no seam is what it's called. I've taken out the seam, so it doesn't look like a bunch of boards. It's just a wood texture. Okay, so we're going to open that. And now you see it show up down here, but it's not connected yet. You got to grab your color and you say, I want that to be my base color. So instead of seeing this peachy, orangey, red color, that's going to create our wood. So now you see it on there, right? That's all it takes. But this looks like it's running the wrong direction to me. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select all these faces, and you'll see them show up over here. And you can even click this button so that whatever you have selected is selected over here. Okay. So I've got all 4 faces. You can see why the wood grain is running the wrong direction, because all of these are tipped. So I'm going to hit the rotate key. And when you have the rotate key selected, if you hold control down, it will snap rotate. So it'll small increments. And you just go until you get to 90 degrees like that. And now our wood grain's running the correct direction. Now to resize it, if you want this to look like now it looks like a pretty giant chunk of wood, right? Because the texture tiling is such. If you go over into your UV scaling and you scale with the S key, so S to scale, if you make these bigger, then the amount of texture it covers is smaller. It gets even larger looking. So this looks like a huge piece of wood. But if you bring it the other way, pretty soon it looks like just a nice little block of wood, just by making it smaller there, right? Now there's no texture on our top yet. We haven't assigned an image to that. So if we click on the wood end grain over here, it will change to that over in our shader window. Shader is your material, same thing. Going to do Shift A again. We're going to grab our image texture. We're going to connect our color to our base color, and then we're going to open a different image. All right. Now I'm going to go this time, and I'm going to go back to my textures folder. back to my wood and boards. I'm going to find my end grain file. I created these, so this is my end grain. I've got multiple logs in here. Now, if I select my face, you can see where it shows up here. I'm going to move it over to this one, and you can see how it's positioning it, right? And if I scale this one, it'll look bigger or smaller. So since I have a kind of small looking block, I'm going to make this smaller as well. If I match it kind of to that size, you can kind of see how that works. If you want tighter. All right, I'm going to go back to layout. So I have a clean look at this. I'm going to change this to viewport shading. Now adjusting colors so that these two match a little better, you can do that in here, or you can just do it in Unity when you bring it in, because now it's mapped. So that's the basic way you add some texture. Now if you want to move things, it's a piece of cake. So maybe you don't like the crack running in this wood right here. Let's go back to our UV editing window. And you can select just that face if you want, and you can move it somewhere else. So find somewhere on your texture you like. Let's move it over, it doesn't matter, let's move it over here. So then you've got that part. Maybe somewhere you've written something. It depends on how you made your texture, right? You can move these and separate them and go anywhere you want, and it will give you a different look, right? So I can pick and choose whichever piece of wood I want. There you go. So that's how you map a texture. So if you have an image file that has multiple different types of images on it, like maybe the wood end grain is down in this corner, it's all in the same PNG or JPEG file, then all you'd have to do is use one material, click on this, and move it to whatever corner or area you need. So that is the very basics of creating a cube and a texture. Now, if we wanted to do some wording on this, like it was a logo or some kind of T marker or whole sign, we'll just need to add another material and create additional geometry or another face to add that to. So let's take a look at that next, and then we'll call this done. Okay, I've already paused and set up the material, but let's take a look at how we're going to find somewhere to put this. We're just going to add a whole number and a little logo to this. And again, this represents either a T marker or a really primitive whole sign or anything you want. What we're going to do, the easiest way to do this, you could draw right on your board texture, right in wherever that image is, the whole number and stuff. But the better way to do this, so that you can drag, drop, and change it easily, is to create a whole new face or object and a whole new material. So we're going to grab the face that we want to add this to. We're going to pick one that doesn't have too many cracks and distractions. We're going to go with this one right here. Grab this face, and we are going to duplicate it. So that is Shift D, and now it is duplicated. And if I move the mouse around, you can see I'm going to constrain it. So I'm immediately, before clicking anything, hit Y, which is the green axis. So now it's just going this way. I'm going to pull it out far enough so we can see that it's different. Without deselecting it, I'm then going to use the P key, which is the shortcut to separate. Separate selection. So now this is a whole one face object different from that one. All right. Now what we're going to do is we are going to make a material for this. Now I've already done that. So it comes inherited with what this object had. We can delete these. So we're going to get rid of this, and we're going to change our one material. Well, we could delete that too. So there's nothing on it. Now we're going to assign what I created, which is just this one called sign. Okay. And it's just, if you look, it changed my shader over here to sign. Now let's pretend like there's nothing here. We have a new material we created called sign. Now over here again, we're going to go add image texture, and we're going to connect our color, and we're going to go find what we made. Now what I made is I made a little smiley face logo thing here, and we're going to go find that smiley PNG. So this is just a PNG file with a whole number one and a logo. It could be anything you want. And it's got a transparent background, which I've made this in Photoshop. And now what we're going to do on our image, now that we have it, we're going to select our face, and we're going to look at where it's mapped to. So here's our UV mapping. Now we can just go back and do this again if we want, UV unwrap. We don't need to do any seams because it's just a single face, and it's going to make it big over here. So now we're going to go to our UV side. We're going to grab our face and we're going to move it around till it's where we want it. We're going to resize it so that it gets the whole picture in there like that. Okay. And now you can see, I don't know if you can see this very well. If I zoom in, you can see it shows it, but it's not transparent, right? It's just a regular background. We're going to go over here to Smiley, and what we're going to do is I'm going to grab not just the color to base color, but our alpha channel, which is our transparency, down to our alpha here. All right, so now what we have is that connected, and you can see our position now. Now, after we've dragged the alpha to the alpha channel in our shader, you can see it's still not transparent, right? So there's one more thing you have to do, and this is just for your own view in Blender. Really all you need to be concerned with as far as getting it to Unity is that your mapping is correct, that it's in the right spot. All this transparency settings and any of the visual setup, it's got to be redone in Unity materials for the look you want. But just to make sure you see everything's working, the last thing you're going to do is over in your materials with the sign material selected, I'm going to go all the way down past all this information, find viewport display. So it's down here. You're going to go viewport display, or just it might just be under settings depending on your version of Blender. And then under that is the settings blend mode. We're going to change that to alpha clip. It means it's going to clip out or cut out where that transparent alpha is on your image. So boom, transparent. Now, what we're going to do here, well, let's mention one more thing. So you can see this is an optional thing. Depends on how you set up your image. You can see it repeats, right? So what you're seeing here is the top, or you're seeing the bottom of the smiley face, and here you're seeing the top of the one because the image is tiling, it's repeating. The last thing you can do if you have that type of problem, you can go into either in your material settings or in your nodes here, you can change your repeat to just clip. That means it'll just stop and it won't repeat the image. So it'll just do it one time wherever you mapped it, and that's it. Now the last thing you want to do here is, depending on how far you moved your duplicated face, we want to put this so it looks like it's part of this, right? So what we're going to do, I'm going to go back to layout mode just so that I've got one big image here. And we're going to move this back so it's right next to this, so it's almost intersecting it. So I'm going to grab G, and I'm going to hit Y because that's the green. You can see it highlight. Now as I move this, what I want to do is I want to move this just so that it doesn't disappear, right? And here's another trick. Whenever you're grabbing, rotating, scaling, those types of changes, if you hold the Shift key, it'll make tiny changes. So if I move the mouse right now, you can see how far it's moving. If I hold Shift, it just moves super slow. So I'm going to first get it really close. I'm going to rotate around. I'm going to get really close in here. And now I'm going to grab Y again, and I'm going to hold Shift down. And I'm going to go until it disappears. I'm going to bring it just a little bit in front like that. Now, there's no way in-game or even here you're going to be able to tell that that's not right on your item, right? The objects look to be one, but they're separate items. So when you're in game, if you want to change this, you have 18 different images with 2 on it or different yardages. You can just drag and drop it onto this single plane that is in front of that, right? And again, if you want to move where that is, just as a reminder, that's going to be underneath your UV editing. You can grab this if you wanted to raise it up a little higher on there like that. There you go, just like that. And that's basic UV mapping and editing onto the most primitive object, basically a cube, right? Then you're going to be exporting that. You're going to select both because there's 2 items here, so you want to select both of them. And then you would export that as your FBX file, bring it into Unity, and then get your materials set up in there. That is modeling and texturing 101, the very basics. If I have time, I can do something a little more advanced, but please go out, search YouTube. There are a ton of people teaching intro classes on hard surface modeling in Blender. Maybe I can link a couple in the description that I liked. But this is the basic setup for how it works. This is the theory on how it all goes. Hope it was helpful.